All right, welcome to this overlay edit and critique of my own technical interview. I am going to just make comments as we go through watching the interview together and providing feedback and just general knowledge of what I thought and how I did for the interview. So let's go ahead and dive into our mock EDR interview. Go ahead and click play.
All right. Hi, good morning, Haley. Thank you for joining
Hey,
us.
hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Okay, so right there, first thing you should always say is a thank you. Thank you for their time. People are taking time out of their day to come interview you, and they're still considering you as a candidate for the position. So, always great to start with a thank you. Let's also talk about how I'm dressed. I have a basic blue, dark colored polo on, nothing flashy. My hair is down, straightened, a little bit of personality coming through with sunglasses on the top of my head, but I'm not overdressed. I'm not showing up in like business attire. I'm not showing up in a t-shirt. I usually pick something medium, in the package for a polo. Dark colors are better. Nothing is, crazy patterns. It's not distracting to the interview. Also, my camera angle. I have good lighting. My camera angle is good. It's level. I have a mic set up. Um, I'm not too zoomed in. I'm not too zoomed out of the shot. I take up most of the shot with my body, and so far looks pretty standard. Good presentation and dressed somewhat appropriately. Let's continue.
I know we are waiting for a couple more members of the team to join us, so we'll just give
Okay.
them a moment. Oh, yep, looks like someone's logging on right now. But while we're waiting, is that an Italian flag in the background that you
Oh,
have over there?
yep. This is the
Yeah,
Italian flag. I come from a large family of Italians. We all live in the same
nice.
town. We all do the same thing. We've all been in the service for active duty,
Oh,
firefighters, EMS, police. So, yeah,
oh, that's awesome. And are you
proudly
still
deployed it.
involved with that?
Yeah, actually, yeah. On my resume, you probably already know this, but I was active duty in the Navy, and I'm still volunteering for fire departments and local community. I like to support all of that. Keeps me fit.
Yeah,
So,
I hear that. Well, that's
yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you for your service. That's awesome that you're
Thanks.
still so involved.
Thanks for your support. Yeah, so two school of thoughts for what you want to put into the background of your screenshot. Some people like a blank background so that you can't add or devalue anything of potential conflict you can run into with an interviewer. But for me, I'm very proud of my Italian heritage. I think the flag is more than okay to hang behind me, so I like to keep it in there and show a little bit of my personality. I also do it for another reason. In this instance, people were waiting to join the interview. And if your interviewer needs time to stall or make small talk, can't tell you how many times I've had a Navy memorabilia item or the flag in the background where people are like, oh, is that an Italian flag? Oh, is that something you got from the Navy? It just creates a nice segue into creating small talk with you if you need to stall or if you have those couple of awkward minutes as you're waiting for other team members to join. But at the end of the day, do whatever's comfortable to you. Blank background or maybe one or two items in the background that suit your personality, more than okay. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
and I know all about large Italian families. Not myself, but yes, many of my friends. They're
Cool.
everywhere.
Good people. Yeah.
All right. Hi, Greg. Thanks for joining. All right, so I think we do have everyone here. So as you know, this is Greg and this is Sarah over here, who you've already met in your first interview. My name's Melissa, who again you've already met. As you know, this will be your second technical interview with us for this role, so I'll skip the big company intros and all that. But just to briefly remind you of my role here, I am the lead technical manager in this department, and I will be leading the interview today.
Okay.
Greg and Sally might kind of pop in here and there, but so just be aware of that. But all right, with that, I guess let's dive right in if that's okay with you, or do you have any questions up front?
Yeah, please. Right. Go right ahead. If they ever ask if you have any leading questions at the beginning of an interview, best to just be polite and say, no, please, let's get started with the interview. And if you have time at the end, you can then ask your questions at the end of the interview. So that's because some of your questions might be answered as you go through the interview. And they will probably ask you at the end, what questions do you have for us? And you want to be prepared to have some of your questions at the end and not say like, oh, nope, I don't have any questions. Thank you. It's good to ask one or two questions at the end.
Okay. All right. Well, again, let's just start off with the basics. Just please introduce yourself briefly and give us a background on your work experience, if you will, just as a little refresh for us.
100% the interviewer is going to ask you to summarize your career. If you cannot do this in 60 seconds or less, you are doing a disservice to yourself. So let's go ahead and see how I answered this question. Sure. Thank you, everyone, for meeting here today. I know everyone's busy, so I really appreciate your time to allow me to move forward with this interview process. Brief background on me. Coming in with 8 years of all blue team experience, all defensive cyberspace operations. It's all SOC and IR work. I do feel like I have a strong skill set in EDR, which is what this job is specifically geared toward. So I can go into any specifics if you'd like about my background and my career from what you've seen on my resume, but at a high level, all blue team defensive cybersecurity operations, and I feel very proficient in my EDR skills and experience. Definitely under 60 seconds. I mentioned at a high level, I got 8 years experience. They can read my resume. If they have any questions, they can see what certifications are on my resume. And I tried to relay it back to the two main job roles that I've had, SOC and incident response. And also this is an EDR position that I'm applying for. So of course I mentioned in those 60 seconds, I think I have good EDR skill sets and experience to bring to your team.
Perfect. What EDRs do you have experience with, and which do you feel the most proficient in?
The market leaders for sure. So CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1, Carbon Black. I definitely feel pretty comfortable in there. But I've also had time in consoles that are less prevalent. Cortex XDR has a great solution that's coming up. Microsoft Defender, Cyber Reason, Trend Micro, a lot of the other EDR solutions. But my major focus and soak time and experience is going to come from Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, and Sentinel-1.
Oh, that's awesome. I love to hear that. I guess briefly, can you explain what endpoint detection and response is and why it's important for cybersecurity? I'm sure you have a good answer for that, being in for 8 years.
A very common interview question is to tell us why EDR is important and why we want it to be employed in organizations. Yeah, thanks. Oh, I hope so. Well, EDR, it's kind of as its name implies, right? It's going to detect malicious activity on the endpoint and then hopefully give you some features within that console to be able to respond to those potentially malicious activity that's going on in your network. Why is it important for companies to have or employ some sort of solution in their environment? Well, it's usually your first line to notify you if there is malicious activity going on in your network. You want to have that first notification, that first tip off, and usually EDR is right there. And if you have the correct prevention policies enabled on it, the right level of protection, hopefully it would be able to mitigate that threat and stop something from executing.
Perfect. Well said. Thank you.
Pretty basic answer. It's there to stop threats.
All right. What are the key differences between EDR and traditional antivirus software, would you say?
Another really common question that you might get asked is to explain the difference between EDR slash XDR and then your normal typical AV solutions. So let's see how I answered this question. Yeah, probably, EDR, this is going into like the more advanced features that you can take. Standard AV solutions, one of the big differences is the way that they're able to detect and mitigate. Your standard AV solutions like Norton, Symantec, McAfee, these are all scanning your endpoints for known static-based detections, so something like a malicious hash. And there's not really a lot of additional features you can do with a standard AV solution, like respond or quarantine a host or go query or deep dive or block by file name, etc. It's mostly there just to perform a baseline scan of the device and match on anything that is known static as bad. EDR is a whole wealth of a tool that can really have advanced features that you won't find in standard EDR, like remote shelling onto the host, querying your endpoint logs, building use cases and detections, taking response actions like network containing, isolating hosts, lots more features that I guess at a high level is the answer to that question than a standard EDR, than a standard AV solution.
Perfect. Yes, that's absolutely what we were looking for.
So kind of misspoke where I should have said AV. I said EDR a couple times. It's okay. They know what you mean. Just keep rolling with it. If you fumble over your words, we're all humans. It's okay.
All right. Then we have quite a few more questions for you, so we'll kind of
Okay.
roll right in. I know we all have work to get back to. So, how does EDR technology work to detect and respond to security threats on endpoints at a high level?
Yeah, I guess I can answer that with kind of some of the different detections you can have in the console. So we talked about
Great.
static with traditional AV. So this is matching on something static, something that doesn't change. So a hash, domain, etc. This is something that's known malicious and it's built into that repository of known bad. It gives you a detection to say, hey, this is something malicious. You can also have dynamic based detections. So maybe there's some type of behavioral action that's being performed, odd parent child processes being spawned off, suspicious command lines being thrown that may trigger the sensor to be like, hey, behaviorally, this is not something that we would expect as legitimate activity. We're going to flag it as you as potentially malicious. Some of the other signatures, AI is up and coming in the field. We do a lot of machine learning, adaptive response, heuristic based detection. So, as EDR solutions grow and emerge and advance their technologies, you're going to have more detections that are static, dynamic, but then also heuristic AI machine learning.
Oh, perfect.
Pretty much just answered that question with knowing the basics and the difference between the types of detections you can have in EDR. So, static based, your behavioral based, machine learning, adaptive learning, and heuristics. I kept it pretty simple.
All right. Can you describe the typical workflow of what you would do after the EDR detects a potential threat on an endpoint?
Sure. There's a lot of different threats that come to mind. So to try and like answer your question a bit better, are you able to provide me like a specific example,
Yeah.
file or network based, something like that? Always okay to ask for clarification during an interview. I really didn't know these questions in advance, so when she asked me like describe what you would do to a threat that came from an EDR alert, I was like, well, there's a lot of different uh, detections to triage that came to mind. I was like, what if this is network related, like a network based indicator, like an IP address? I'm going to treat that a little bit differently than I would for like a malicious file. So, always okay to ask for clarification and say, do you have an example in mind of what you would like me to walk through of how I would remediate that detection? More than okay.
Of course. Yeah, if you could be more specific, yeah, file-based indicator or maybe a network-based, whichever you feel more comfortable or proficient in.
Okay. So I'll go with a standard file then, something that's being flagged as malicious. So your question was, what would I do? What is my response methodology?
Yes.
So first of all, I'm going to figure out what the file is. I can do open source research. I can check the hash. I can kind of look at the name, see the directory that it's running out of. I can see the command line arguments that it's being thrown. Maybe I can review the parent process that spawned this file. Those will kind of give me a quick synopsis of what am I working with? Is this file truly malicious or is this potentially a false positive? The next thing I really want to check is how quickly do I have to triage this detection? Do I have 2 minutes or can I really do a deep dive and try and figure out root cause analysis for this with 20 to 30 minutes of diving deep into the logs? One of the biggest indicators that allows me to answer that question is outbound network activity. If this file is spawning something else, or if this box has outbound network traffic that is going to potentially malicious IPs or malicious domains, right away I'm going to network contain the host, especially if it's a workstation. If it's a server, depending on my roles and responsibilities and what I'm allowed to do, maybe I have to escalate the ticket first to quarantine a prod server. That would definitely be something that needs to be signed off on. But a regular workstation, I'll probably network contain it. Then I'll try and move towards the remediation. So I've kind of gone from identify to containment to remediation for blocking the threat. Right there is a great tip I can give you. When you have a long-winded answer, like I'm being very long and descriptive in my answer here because I was asked a loaded question about the actions I would take to respond to a malicious file on a box, it's best to kind of summarize your thought process to the interviewer as you're going through your long answer so that they don't get lost. So right there, I broke out the 3 steps of where I was and then where I'm about to go next. So if the EDR solution didn't block the malicious file and it's still running, first thing I want to do is also delete the file, contain it, block the hash, put in a block for file name or something like that. Even if the host is network contained, I still want to squish that executable that's live and running on the host because I want it to stop whatever it's doing. Then maybe, depending on protecting forensic artifacts, maybe I want to pull the file off to detonate it in a sandbox or observe its true behavior before completely removing it from the host. But then I would move towards, after doing maybe some dynamic analysis in a sandbox, going onto the remote host via remote shell, whatever that EDR solution offers, and deleting it off the host, blocking it from executing if it's running with a kill command or something like that. And then the last thing I like to do is just check prevalency in the environment. How many times has this hash or file been seen in our organization? Did it touch any other boxes? Are there any other detections relevant on this host that I should look into? So, sorry this was like a long-winded answer to your question, but there's a lot of things that come to mind. So, encompassing all of that and then, following any rabbit holes that I may go down as I'm going through any of those avenues. But the general methodology holds true. Identify what I'm looking at, figure out if I need to take a response action like network containment, going towards remediation, removing the file, blocking hash, blocking file name, and then checking prevalency in the organization to see if we have a wider scope incident or if it's just isolated to this one host.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean,
Did a nice job summarizing my answer there once again at the end to kind of show my entire thought process broken out into 4 or 5 steps there.
that was an awesome answer. That's definitely what we want to hear.
Cool,
A
thanks.
lot of that going on. So,
Thanks.
well, leading into our next question, I know you had mentioned false positive or not. So, how does EDR handle false positives? What strategies can we use to minimize them in your experience?
Yeah, we definitely try to not get burnout, right, from a lot of false positive detections that are always flooding the queue. So I think, whether you're going for an analyst position like this one or maybe a more EDR engineering position, the two teams work together and hopefully you know that person on your team that can go towards the engineering route. If you find that there's a lot of false positives and we're trying to decrease that number, work with your engineering team to say, hey, I think we can further tune this detection to not hit on this file name or anything running out of this folder or something like that to tune it. You can maybe put in exclusions into the console to allow this to run. Maybe you can whitelist a hash if it's known good. So false positives, they obviously play a huge role. It's probably 90% of the alerts that we see, but you should always be working towards taking that number down, and you do that through working with your engineering team to tune the use cases, tune your alerting that's available to you, and the engineering team isn't going to know what they need to tune unless the analysts tell them. So that would kind of be my approach, is work with the engineering team and suggest to them how to further tune the detection to stop firing.
Okay, perfect. All right, my next question, we are steering into a different direction here a little bit. Can you explain the concept of threat hunting in the context of EDR? How would you go about conducting a threat hunt?
Threat hunt, I would kind of expect a question to come up here for, how do you threat hunt? Have you threat hunt before? If so, what have you done? Or what can you tell me your methodology is around threat hunting? Okay. Yeah, threat hunting, I feel like it's a hot term out there right now. Everyone wants to hire threat hunters and further protect the organization. I'll just kind of give you my completely biased opinion of threat hunting. I don't have like a textbook definition of, what threat hunting is or how we apply it. So I'll just speak from experience if that's all right.
Perfect.
So threat hunting, I'm kind of looking for known malicious activity. You can kind of build custom searches within any of the leader EDR solutions available to you. You can kind of save them to continuously run on top of your endpoints, to continually check your endpoint logs for known malicious activity. So that would probably be the first step, is writing custom signatures to not just rely on what the endpoint is going to tell me is malicious from that vendor's proprietary signatures, but I want to be in my own control when I threat hunt of this is what I know would be malicious. So some examples, maybe you're looking for executables running out of odd directories like the temp or users or a public directory, roaming profiles, etc. I really wouldn't expect to find executables in any of those directories. So maybe I write my own custom search, save it off, and then that can be search number one in my threat hunting process. I would kind of build a bunch of searches like that, maybe have a repository of 30 to 50 searches that are running across my environment, and that would kind of be my threat hunt. Other than that, you can kind of follow leads that come from detections and try and figure out further root cause analysis for what happened, and maybe you have to go threat hunt on that endpoint, pull off logs of interest, collect forensic artifacts of interest, do a bit deep dive in that log retention for whatever you have, etc. So threat hunting at a whole is, to me, building a bunch of searches to check your environment to see if anything pops for what you would consider malicious in your environment. It's a very manual process. Threat hunting, that is my honest opinion of it. It's manual. You build it out, you build your searches. Again, this is an EDR interview, not a SOC or IR type threat hunt. My answer would be different for those, but specifically for an EDR interview, I'm going to build searches in the console and then create detections around them to beef up my endpoint detection and response tooling, to not just rely on the vendor's proprietary signatures. Let's build our own for what we know is bad and see if we get any alerts from them. So very manual, but definitely can be done.
Right. Right. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you. Our next question we have for you is: what are some common what are some common challenges or limitations associated with EDR implementations, and how would you address them?
Common challenges for EDR being implemented. Clearly didn't have a strong answer in mind for this one. It required me to think a little bit. You are going to have questions on your interview that require you to think on your feet. That's all of them. But this one wasn't really like a standard, like, oh, what could be a problem with EDR, or something you've come across. So I was like, what have I come across in my work experience that I can speak to? I'll just say one thing that comes to mind is supported operating systems. So within your environment, a lot of people can have stuff that works and they don't want to change it. So maybe the operating system is super old and they don't want to modify it. Well, any kind of modern solution that you're trying to push out, you can kind of run into a common problem of whether that operating system is supported or not by that EDR solution. And if it's not supported, you can't really deploy out the agent to it, right? So how are you going to help protect that endpoint if you can't get the EDR agent deployed out to it? That's kind of a common challenge we see is, well, we want to go with CrowdStrike or we want to go with Carbon Black, but what if it doesn't support all of our legacy devices or other odd flavors of operating systems that we have in our environment? So how can they be addressed, I think was the second part of your question, if we just stick with this example. You can always reach out to support. Maybe that vendor has legacy installers that they're able to give you, and you can offer those to your environment as a solution. Otherwise, I'm going to default to defense in depth strategies. For the endpoints that aren't protected, let's put them behind additional firewalls. Let's put an AV solution on them if that solution is supported. Let's create additional watch lists and threat hunts to maybe detect activity around these endpoints. Something that can kind of encompass additional layers of security, especially if you're missing that major component of the EDR agent being on the host, because those are very vulnerable. So speaking of the host being vulnerable, let's make sure they're patched, up to date, don't have any known CVEs, etc. Aren't publicly accessible. I don't know. I can ramble probably, but does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes, no, that definitely did.
Sometimes you will get lost in your answer. For me, I went on a lot of different avenues on that one. Didn't really have a concise, crisp answer, but still came up with some type of answer for unsupported operating systems, a common challenge that we have with EDR when we roll it out. What do we do for those legacy devices? When in doubt, always ask support. That's definitely a more than appropriate answer to give on an interview, as well as if you don't know how to troubleshoot something or you couldn't fix the root cause problem, or it's causing some issue in your organization, what would be your next step for troubleshooting? You can always reach out to support. That's what they're there for. And they're there to help you solution it and make their product better as well. So, not my strongest answer, but still came out of something and talked about general cybersecurity best practices for defense in depth strategies to help combat potential issue that we could see with deploying out EDR.
Perfect
Okay,
answer. Thank you so much.
cool.
All right. So, what are the best practices for managing and maintaining an EDR system to ensure its ongoing effectiveness?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do to manage an EDR solution. I would say, since we were just talking about
Hmm.
operating systems and what's supported and what's not, something else that goes along with that is making sure the latest and greatest version of the sensor, or maybe an N-1 version of the sensor, is deployed out to those hosts. So the EDR solution is only as effective as you keep it up to date and you tune it. So you want to make sure all of your endpoints out in your environment are up to date with the sensor that's not like 10 revisions behind, because a lot of things have gone out, a lot of things have changed with the sensor revisions to improve the performance of that agent. So number one, making sure you have an agent that's efficient out there would ensure your EDR solution is efficient. The other answer I can give is making sure the console is tuned appropriately. If your console isn't tuned to have the right level of protections or the right hosts in the host groups or policies applied to them, it's going to be very, very hard to efficiently manage that EDR solution out into your environment. So up-to-date sensors, console config are kind of just the first two that come to mind. I have a habit of always re-summarizing my long-winded answer into 2 or 3 short bullet points or a step process so that the interviewer is tracking my actual answer. So always re-summarizing my main bullet points, giving my 2 answers there, and then also leaving it up to the interviewer to be like, if you want me to try and think on the fly for additional answers that I could give you, please let me know. And if they don't and they want to move on, they're fine to move on to the next question.
Okay, great. And how do you stay updated on the latest trends and threats in the EDR field? And how do you apply this knowledge to improve your EDR strategy in your position?
100% very likely question is, how do you stay up to date with the latest trends and threats emerging in our field of cybersecurity? So I definitely would expect this one to be a question you get asked for sure. Yeah, it's staying up to date with the latest trends in the market. The latest attacks, the latest CVEs that are coming out, the latest publications. Cybersecurity is always continuously learning. You got to stay up to
Mhm.
date. So besides reading open source reports, maybe from Bleeping Computer or Threat Post or something like that, I actually like to read the reports that are published internally by the vendor themselves. Oftentimes, the console will have announcements or threat reports that they've written, and why not read the postings that are coming directly from the EDR vendor that you're deploying in your environment? So remember, this is an EDR interview, so I want my answers to be focused around the EDR console, EDR vendors, EDR solutions, etc. So answering with reading the vendor's threat posts or threat reports that come out, a great answer. So those can be helpful. Other than that, latest trends, besides reading reports and reading internal to the vendor for what they're publishing for their threat reports, actually paying attention to the activity that's going on in your detection. If you see something that's new for the first time, raise it up to your team. Say, hey, has anyone seen this? Making sure it's not some new TTP or something being leveraged in the environment that you haven't seen before. Making sure something hasn't occurred like a 0 day and you didn't know about it and there was no patch for it. Extremely rare that you will see that, but sometimes just staying aware of what's happening in your own organization can kind of help you stay up to date for what's the latest malicious activity that we're seeing, if we're seeing it at all. So,
Perfect. Great. That is very true. So, our next question here, in the context of EDR, what is the MITRE attack framework and how can it be used to enhance security?
yeah, I would expect one question on some sort of overarching cybersecurity framework, whether that's NIST or the SANS incident response methodology or a MITRE attack framework. I would definitely be familiar with some common frameworks that we use in the organization and how they can relate to your job role that you're applying to. So I can try and relate the MITRE attack framework to EDR. I think that's your question.
Yes.
Sorry.
No
So
worries. Yes. If you have any
the
questions, definitely spit them back to us.
yeah, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. This is a framework built to track known TTPs, so tactics, techniques, and procedures within the higher landscape of cybersecurity. It's a common framework that we all can go back to and leverage and kind of map activity that we're seeing to a known technique and then hopefully a known tactic. So as it relates to EDR, you kind of want to be aware of maybe activity you're seeing in your environment and where it falls on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Because
Hmm.
if you figure out that you have a lot of tactics falling under initial access for maybe phishing, maybe you want to build more use cases around initial access. Or if you find that your EDR solution hasn't detected anything in one tactic in the whole framework, well, maybe you should work with your development team to test to make sure your use cases are actually going to detect that malicious activity instead of the scary option of you just have a bunch of unknown malicious activity going on in your environment and you're not being alerted to it at all. So the MITRE ATT&CK framework is going to allow you to figure out where you are proficient with your detections and help your engineering side of the console for maybe a purple team exercise, going out and testing known tactics, techniques, and procedures and seeing if your EDR solution flags on them, and then mapping them to the framework to make sure you're kind of covered in all the major areas. And the other side of the MITRE ATT&CK framework is figuring out what's happening in your environment if you do have malicious activity. If it's mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, maybe that can tip you off to what malicious actor you're working with or what other TTPs to look for based off of the one indicator that you've been given. And hopefully it will provide some standard framework to helping you map what's going on in your environment, but also improving your environment to make sure you're covered for detecting all of the TTPs that are outlined in the framework.
Perfect.
Kind of a long-winded answer there. Didn't have clear direction, but tried to bring home my 2 points of it can help you detect where you're proficient or where you might be lacking for visibility for detections that you have. And then the other side being if you do see malicious activity and a bunch of techniques are showing up on the framework, maybe that can lead you to hint towards what malicious actor you might be working with and further assist in your threat hunt for what that malicious actor is known to do. It's definitely super helpful in that use case as well.
I love that. Very true. Um, what are the key considerations when selecting an EDR solution for an organization, and how do you evaluate different vendors? Have you ever been a part of that process?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great question, a fair question. Key considerations for me, again, just being completely biased. I have had a couple of says and like, I want to go with this vendor over this one because I like this feature better. But definitely in its entirety, what I would look for in any EDR vendor is one, endpoint log retention. Does the solution offer us somewhere in the console to be able to search the raw logs? And if so, what does that retention policy look like? Greater retention is great. 7 days minimum is pretty standard, but if you can get more than that, like 30 or 60, definitely would make me very happy. So, endpoint log, number one. Number two, the ability to remote into a host, like going live on a machine, getting that sudo command prompt pulled up so that you can perform response actions or run your tools of interest or just get a high level output of network activity or processes running. I think the live shell feature is something that I would really look for in an EDR solution. Other than that,
Absolutely.
basic standards of maybe being able to block by file name or file path. Some EDR solutions only allow you the option to block by hash, and that's just been a major limitation that I've seen. So the ability to have both blocking by file path or file name definitely needs to be up there. And then maybe something on top of that for just the ability to have something where you can assign the alerts out to a team or have some sort of internal log that's related to the detection so your team isn't, worrying about who's working on what. You can kind of assign it out. I like that feature. It's a minor one,
Hmm.
but those are kind of some of the things I would look for depending on the org and what they're trying to do. It's a very difficult question to answer, and the answer that you give will really give the interviewer an insight to your level of experience and how much time you spent in various EDR consoles so that you can compare and contrast which vendor has what feature, which ones you find useful, what capabilities you wish you had in some solutions or others. So, this is by no means an easy question to answer, and it's a really strong question to ask to gauge the potential candidates' experience with what EDR solutions they've used, because now they know which ones are most important to them and ones that they wish they would have had on all solutions moving forward. So figure out what features you like and which ones you find beneficial to you, and then leverage that to put that into your answer, and always try to speak from experience.
Okay, perfect. All right, we do have a couple more questions here for you. I know we are
Okay.
getting towards the end here. What are your favorite features in CrowdStrike, for example?
Sure. CrowdStrike, I think one feature that really sets it apart would be its sandbox. I think it's really cool that CrowdStrike
Okay.
offers an internal sandbox as part of its EDR solution. I haven't seen any other vendors kind of offer that. So the fact that your organization can save money by not having to go out and buy a sandbox solution to add to their price per year for tools that the SOC can use. I think it's an overlooked feature, and it's really great to have that all built into your subscription and being able to do some, low level, entry level static and dynamic analysis on malware files. Really great feature to have the sandbox there. Short, sweet, to the point. Pick a feature you like. They asked me specifically about CrowdStrike, so know one or two leading features and maybe some of the EDRs that you've gained experience from, and remember them as features that you like to work with and are some of your favorites.
Oh, that's awesome. All righty, Haley. So we do have one last question here for you.
Okay.
So how does EDR integrate with other cybersecurity tools and solutions within an organization's security stack?
Yeah, tool integration, tool stack for an environment, definitely something to consider. You don't want to move forward with the wrong product if it doesn't integrate with all of your other tools. So, for example, if we're trying to pick an EDR solution and we want to pick one that's best for the organization, let's talk about our tool stack. We just talked about the sandbox. Like, do we already have a sandbox or not? Is that feature going to be suddenly more important for us to consider or less important as we already subscribe to some sort of external sandbox solution? Do we integrate our logs into a SIM? If so, does that SIM support this EDR's integration? Is there some sort of API feature that's going to be able to integrate with it? Is there back and forth compatibility for what we're trying to do with maybe integrating to a SOAR platform? How would this product tie in? Does it have those capabilities for us to pull information from the console to then automate away? Or is it really limited to you have to do everything and log into another, tab on your computer to manage and configure the EDR solution? So integrating it with other tool stacks in your environment, you have to figure out, what are you trying to do? What are you really trying to do to mature your organization? And how does this EDR solution support that? Or maybe is it missing some features that won't allow you to do your automation plan that you have, for example, or integration to your
Mhm.
SIM, for example. So figuring out maybe automation and integration with the other tools, I think that's one of the biggest things to consider with, how does EDR integrate with your tool stack and what are the questions you need to ask? A lot of us are going towards automation, and making sure your EDR solution is going to integrate nicely with your tool stack is a good question to ask, and kind of gauges your experience for, well, what are we trying to do as an industry? And I mentioned automation and integration with the SIM solution for longer endpoint retention. That's probably where I would go with that answer, but great to tie it back to where the industry is going. Automation is huge. SOAR platforms are huge. Can this EDR solution fit into that tool stack if we want our org to move in that direction? So, pretty standard answer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Haley. Well, that was all we had for you today. Thank you again for your time. If you have any follow-up questions for us, definitely feel free to reach out. You have all of our contact information. Did you have any specific questions at this time?
I told you. They always ask at the end if you have any questions. So save it till the end. If you have questions, it's good to answer just one or two. But, If you've already had a few rounds of interviews with the same interviewer, the same team members, and you got your questions out in the first or second interview, no need to re-ask them. So no, I think I covered them in the initial interview, just kind of asking about the team
Mhm.
operations processes that you guys have. I just want to say again, thank you so much for your time, allowing me to interview and move forward with it. It's very nice to meet all of you. Always say thank you again, and then it was nice to meet everybody and thank them for their time. And I hope to hear from you soon.
Yes, absolutely. We will be in touch. Well, with that, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day, and we will reach out to you soon.
Okay, so a great synopsis on a technical interview that really wasn't that bad. It didn't get too nitty gritty into a technical interview that we could run, but it still asked broad questions generally that are technical in nature. So I hope you guys found this beneficial. And if there are any questions that we missed or any questions that you've gotten on interviews, please leave them in the comments and let us know, and we'll do our best to hop on another mock technical interview.